I'm particularly pleased to be able to introduce Dr. Greg Lavery from Lavery Pennell. There's also a Pennell in the room. Where are you, Nick? Thank you. Greg came to us with an idea some time ago, and he's been leading the way on something that we call the next manufacturing revolution for some time. Simon Brown of 2 Degrees, hands up. Where are you? You're hiding still. Thank you. Has been a key partner in this, and Greg will explain something that we've been doing in the area of trying to get people to understand non-labor resource productivity, and that's industry understand it as well as policymakers understand it. I'm then going to pile in for a few minutes talking a little bit about the Foresight report and what's been happening with that. And with that, I'll let you start, Greg.
Great, thanks Steve. Greg Lavery from Lavery Pennell. We're a consulting firm, and Steve sort of introduced how we got together with Cambridge and 2 Degrees for the next manufacturing revolution. Now, the first lesson that we figured out was if you're going to talk about non-labour resource efficiency and try and motivate people to do something about it, you don't call it non-labour resource efficiency. You call it something a little grander. So we came up with the idea of the next manufacturing revolution. And if you think about revolutions, they involve very large-scale changes, an irreversible step forward, serious profit improvements, and a whole bunch of other things. And we found that actually resource efficiency falls into those categories. So let me recap quickly if this is working, which it doesn't seem to be. Page down. No, it's not working at all. Should we get that up? Do you want to try and get that under control?
I'll try and
try and fix it. It's looking weird. Ian, we might need your help with this. Where's Ian gone? Yeah, could you please? It's not the same. So the next manufacturing revolution was basically we took 7 topics of resource efficiency. Those are energy efficiency, waste reduction, most specifically process waste. We had transport efficiency, we had supply chain collaboration, we had packaging optimization, and we had growth of new directions, as well as circular resource use. So all of those topics fall under the umbrella of non-labour resource efficiency. Are we up and running yet? No, maybe not.
I have no
idea.
idea.
IT guys here.
Yeah.
It's all going to go wrong.
Come on, IT man. All right. So what we did is we then, and this is recapping a little bit because we introduced the report at last year's conference because we just launched it then. What we then did is said, well, for each of those topics, what's the size of the opportunity? If you compare where industry averages are versus where good practice is, and we did an exhaustive study of international good practice on that, made some reasonableness assumptions as to what's possible. You come up with some really interesting opportunities there, and then we looked at, okay, how would you implement those, and what are the barriers to actually doing that? So it was sort of an end-to-end study, 260 pages. You can read that at www.nextmanufacturingrevolution.org, where we've got all the reports that I'll put up in a minute if we ever get the capability to do it. Okay, so there's the topics. Looks like we're back underway. This is what we came up with. So if you add up all of those 7 different areas, what we identified for UK manufacturing sector only, cash in the pocket of the UK manufacturing sector. This is not about shared value. This is the UK manufacturing sector's share of that shared value. 10 billion per annum additional profits, which is a 12% profit increase. That's quite significant. 300,000 new jobs, which is 12% increase in UK manufacturing employment, and 27 million tonnes of CO2 annually equivalent, which is 4.5% of the UK's entire greenhouse gas emissions. This even surprised us how large it was, but just goes to show that really there is some sort of revolution potentially going on here with the size of this opportunity. There are a bunch of other additional manufacturer benefits that you can see there, as one would expect. So what happened then? So okay, we've started, we've got this report out. What we were determined not to do, all 3 of our participating groups, was put another report on a website that no one reads. So we said, let's have some actually interesting, active things to actually continue the discussion amongst all of those relevant stakeholders in the next manufacturing revolution. What we did in February this year is we convened, led by the Institute for Manufacturing, a workshop on the food and beverage sector to say what's going on what are the real barriers that we're facing in a really sectoral level, and what can we do about it? You can see the participants there. There is a roughly 40-page report for the food and beverage sector, so if you'd like to read that, once again, that's at the Next Manufacturing Revolution website. And one of the interesting things that came out of that was a roadmap, because it was a road mapping exercise included in that, a vision for 2023, and this is what all those participants could see good practice looking like in 2023, which I think if you read through that, and I'm not going to go through that in detail, but if you read through that, you'll find some really interesting aspects of how a food and beverage manufacturer works. Actually, incredibly logical as well. You think, okay, why wouldn't you have all the waste going to renewable heat and bioethanol? But if you look where the manufacturing sector is right now, it's not at that point. But we're hoping by 2023, these will be regular day-to-day parts of best practice, and hopefully more than that. Hopefully it's well adopted. So that report, you can read more about that. Good news is there's going to be another continuing number of those workshops led by Steve, and if you're interested, Ian Bamford is now collecting names for what those next workshops look like. I think we're talking about automotive at some stage, aerospace potentially, and apparel was the other one that's in planning. So if you're in any of those sectors and have some interest, have a chat with Ian in the first instance. I think they'll probably occur in the next few months. Okay, so what do you do then? So we're starting to go down sectoral routes. We're having some really interesting conversations. One of those conversations led to a really interesting piece of work, which I'm just about to introduce. Interface said to us, you know, we're sick of telling the world how great we are as Interface, and the world's getting sick of hearing about it. Let's do something a little bit different. Can you guys, based on the work you've done in the Next Manufacturing Revolution, have a look at how we got to where we are? And for that matter, how did Unilever and Patagonia and all those other companies that are known for their sustainability, how is it that they're getting above average profits and doing very well, both economically and environmentally and socially? And so what we did is we took a good look at how all of those companies have evolved over time, and what we found is that they actually evolved through a three-step approach, which we call the new industrial model. The really interesting thing about this, this three-step approach, and I'll talk you through it, the first step is that it's about resource efficiency. So what all of those companies did to be incredibly successful was first of all said, let's reduce our resource use. So all of those topics that we talked about on non-labour resource efficiency in the Next Manufacturing Revolution, they are there driving a reduction in cost, a reduction in footprint, and a more sustainable outcome. The second thing these leading companies did was said, let's replace our non-sustainable inputs with more sustainable inputs, be they recycled materials, bio-based materials, renewable energy. Now, that requires a little bit of investment, but these companies realised that having done that, what you can then do is think about your customer offering. And that means, and we use the term re-offer, thinking about those commercial competitive advantages that you've established in the first two stages, to think about new products, new business models, better customer loyalty, and all of those sorts of ways of creating value at the end of, at the customer end of a manufacturing process. And what is specifically, I suppose, satisfying about this work is that there you've got there your foundation first step, non-labour resource efficiency. So when we talk about a revolution and where it goes from now, there is a roadmap right here for a manufacturer, as you want to say, we want to move to a leadership position, be more profitable and be more sustainable. Here's a simple three-step approach. And we've been delighted by the take-up of this. It was in Le Monde, I think last week, they had a big article on this. French TV picked it up. It was launched at Interface and ourselves and various others launched it in Denmark, the Netherlands, Germany, France, and the UK. We've been in the New Scientist with this concept. It's starting to get some really interesting traction. So it just goes to show what happens when you start with non-labour resource efficiency, a not very sexy topic. 2 years ago, in a little room, we all said, well, hang on, shouldn't we be trying to galvanise some thinking around this? So that's a sort of update on where the thinking's gone. We thought it might be useful as well to reflect on what's trending amongst those different topics in a number of spheres. So I'll start with industry, and we've called this the sort of industry report card, what's happening on those 7 topics in the last 12 months since we last spoke with you. Okay, so on energy, first of all, still unfashionable. Now, I don't know that fantastic tech adoption curve that we just had. I don't know whether energy is still down in the left-hand side or whether it's in the depths of despair and emerging from that. But we're seeing, whilst it's still unfashionable, some really good progress on some particular technologies and solutions within there. Incremental sort of behavioural change is still, we're finding, not done particularly well, and massive opportunities there. On waste, hats off to the UK manufacturing sector for really grasping the zero waste to landfill and driving that pretty hard. So we're seeing lots of companies that are zero waste to landfill, but overall waste is still largely ignored whilst this focus on zero waste to landfill continues, so we think there's opportunity there. In terms of packaging, that still falls in the too hard basket. So, well, we can't really address the packaging because that's all about the shipping, it's about the storage, it's about the advertising. There's so many different aspects in there. So whilst we've seen some really good examples of packaging weight, for example, stepping down 30% and material usage as well, those remain isolated and don't remain a sort of ongoing pervasive trend. Circular resource use, very fashionable right now. You might have heard about the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Everyone seems to be talking about the circular economy. There is a concern there that there's a lot of admiring the problem going on. We're hoping that there's going to be some real traction around that. Now, we can all cart out the examples of Caterpillar and Xerox and the photocopier companies, but let's remember they were doing what they're doing long before the Ellen MacArthur Foundation came along. So we're hoping that what the current movement is going to spurn is some real doing rather than admiring the problem. And there's a risk, of course, that you fall from the peak of inflated expectations down into that trough of despair if no real traction occurs in that area. On transport, we're still seeing limited attention on transport efficiency, especially where a company outsources that. There's a lot of the sort of out of sight, out of mind. And the large companies we work with, we say, well, look, even though it's outsourced, you can still have an interesting conversation that can lead to significant savings. And what we found is a number of our clients have largely just ignored it, but when we, with them, go and have a chat to the transport companies sort of largely say, well, look, we were wondering when you were going to come along and have a chat with us. There's about a 20 to 30% saving that we can make with a few ideas that don't cost very much. So more work to do on transport. Supply chain collaboration, Simon, I think, gave us some international global best practice yesterday explaining what he's doing, so hats off for them as leading some of the most outstanding examples in that space. And then growth through greener products. Let's remember that companies like Rolls-Royce have always been interested in greener products because that means less fuel burn for customers, which is a large part of an airline's annual cost base. So there's always been a trend towards that. And what we're starting to see is an increasing interest in the idea of turning a sustainability report from a corporate focused, as in it focuses on what the company as a whole is doing, communication medium really targeting the sustainability community and largely investors. How about translating that into something that's a lot more customer and distribution channel focused, talking about products that says, here's a product and this is how great the sustainability aspects are related to that. And what we're actually finding is that there is a revenue or a price upside that you can get, or let's call it a price premium for green products. The other bit of data I wanted to share on that very topic, so first of all, a summary. Substantial opportunities remain, right, from the report card. So doing well must do better. To share a little bit of data in terms of growth, one of the pieces of work that we did that's not been, I think, widely understood out of the next manufacturing revolution is that there is a growth premium. If you want to grow your revenues faster, greener products will help you do that. And here's a few data points that you can refer to. There are a number of companies down in this sort of pink zone here. The y-axis is the green growth premium. So of a company's portfolio of products, those that are nominated as green, how quickly are they growing in terms of sales compared with their non-green? So we just, growth of green minus the growth of the rest of the portfolio gives you a green growth premium. And you can see the really interesting sort of obvious conclusion in the pink box here is that it doesn't matter what percentage of your portfolio is a green product. you're still getting a premium in your growth rate of around 1 to 2%, and for some very specific consumer goods like P&G and Philips, even in excess of that. So this is starting to, I suppose, address that myth of, well, green products customers, do they really want it? Well, yes, they do, and we've got some evidence as well that we can share offline about the fact that they're prepared to pay a premium and why they're prepared to pay that. Reflecting then, so we've looked at industry, what's been happening and what's trending over the last year or so in government and non-government organisation action. We're seeing, and apologies to those in the room, I know many people in this room are working in the resource efficiency space, leading government and NGO initiatives. But here's a few of the ones that we were specifically involved in. The BIS Manufacturing Conference, very interesting that they're now including resource efficiency. Some of you may have seen the Conservative Party and been involved in the Conservative Party's 2020 Productivity Commission paper. Really interesting. It's saying resource efficiency is important. Why aren't we actually reusing our wastes? Why are we measuring ourselves in GDP in terms of net profits? How are we thinking about resource security as a nation? The Environmental Audit Committee's paper on circular economy, the All-Party Parliamentary Sustainable Resource Group's potential of remanufacturing, and then RAP, TSB, EMF, RSA and all those other organisations who are doing great work actually supporting the circular economy and various other parts of non-labour resource efficiency. So there's a sort of suggested conclusion here. Perhaps all of this increasing government attention is leading to regulation down the road. A potential situation that you can say, well, what's coming along? Increased support, perhaps increased regulation. So our conclusions from the way things are going, maybe we got it right 2 years ago. We picked the start of a new trend around resource efficiency. We hope we have, and as Heinz explained yesterday, there's a very good reason why we all should be addressing this. We see significant non-labour resource efficiency opportunities for profitability as well as social and environmental benefits. And for the companies in the room, there's a choice that you can make right now. There's a potential competitive advantage you might like to grasp, or which feels a whole lot more beneficial than waiting until the regulation might come along to force you to change. So it's actually an inflection point now. It feels like, well, we're at the start of something with plenty of opportunity, so now might be an opportunity to move on that one. So Steve, I'll hand over to you to talk about the Future of Manufacturing report.
Thank you. There are a lot of good reports available. Report. I think you'll find it rather interesting, and there's some excellent graphics in there which tend to be very useful when presenting your own arguments that somebody else has bothered to collect and bring together data in a really compelling way. Now, this is a completely different dimension. I was asked to take part in the Government Office for Science foresight activity looking at the future of manufacturing. We talked about it last year. We had a bit of preamble, slightly ahead of publication presentation. I'm not going to go through the full thing again, but it's worth a reprise about what it might mean for sustainability and what's happening out there in the world of industrial policy making. And we do have Mark from BIS, who will answer all questions directly on record later, or possibly not. But you can certainly chat with him about what he thinks is happening in the world of BIS and industrial policy later on. So the Future of Manufacturing report was sponsored by Dr. Vince Cable, Secretary of State for Business, Industry and Skills, hence BIS. And we were asked to investigate what manufacturing might look like out to 2050 in order to inform policy making. This is not a report for industry. It turns out to be quite useful because it is a look forward. But we were asked to make sure that the UK had the opportunity to create and capture future value. Well, that's a bit of a headache. So the first thing you've got to work out is, what do you mean by future value? And if you think about how politicians in particular view industry, that's a challenge. One of the values that we may be seen to bring as a sector is that we employ lots of young, stupid people who are underqualified. Well, actually, that doesn't happen anymore. But it's still a view that's held by many. Some people would like manufacturing to be 20% of the British economy. Personally, I don't think that's a good target. I don't think it's a useful target at all, because we could achieve that by diminishing other parts of the economy. And none of us would consider that a success. So it's a rather silly target. But there are things that are important. And adding and creating value is the dimension. Actually, added value is critical to this. We looked at various influences on the future, the aging population, etc., etc. But I just want to raise a couple of points about technology. Technology is going to change manufacturing. And we figured out that there were 7. I nearly did 8th grade then. Oh gosh, I've been caught up. We figured out that there were 7 large sets of technology, each of which is going to fundamentally alter manufacturing in the future. And we've given ourselves a get out of jail free card by saying there's going to be some disruptive technology that we've not heard of yet, which is going to come along. Great, so that's a lazy one. There are a whole bunch of incremental technologies, things that we already know are beginning to happen, but the scale with which they're going to happen is going to create a fundamental shift. So Sam has already commented, there's sensors everywhere already. You know, that isn't something for the future, that is something that's happening now. What the future, how the future will be different is how we use all of those, and that will absolutely fundamentally change everything. I think that Alistair's been a really good example of the way in which processing technology, something that's been relatively stable for a very long period, the last 50 years, where are the processing revolutions? Well, there's going to be a bunch of them in the future. We're talking about knitting chairs. We're talking about continuous manufacturing in rooms rather than factories. I think that the area that I'm rather excited about, but very glad that I won't be doing the exam questions on, is biology. We're going to be growing, including in processes like continuous manufacturing and crystallization. We're going to be growing about 50% of what we consider to be added value from our factories by 2050. At the moment, we don't grow very much value. You know, we leave that to the food sector. Well, it's going to be mainstream manufacturing. And are we ready for that? Possibly not yet. I will give my joke, because I do need a joke before break time. You launch these things at a public event, and then you go and have a private event in the lovely Houses of Parliament with the Lords and the MPs. And I was explaining these technology changes, and I had a brainwave. Do you know what's coming? Some of you do. I had a brainwave on how you explain how sensors are going to change the world. And I said, imagine you go to Marks and Spencer's and buy your underwear, and it's got a vibration sensor in it. Really? You shouldn't ad-lib, is what I found out. Because the story, I then went on to say, imagine that every time you had a happy moment, the information got sent to M&S, who used that data to design better future product. And at this point, one of the MPs got up and walked out. And I was a bit worried. They didn't say anything, and they're not shy people, so I actually think they had an appointment. But my colleague next to me nudged me and suggested I say to them, tell them it's not in the shops yet. It's a true story. I'm still recovering from that one. Let me tell you what the 5 key findings are. And actually this is consistent. You know, these messages came through in that last presentation about reoffer. They come through in what we're doing with data and crystals and in many of the projects and what we see outside. Manufacturing isn't going to be making products and selling it and forgetting about what we make and moving on to making the next one. It's the chemistry, the molecules are too valuable and we know what to do with those molecules, and the customers are just part-time owners of them and making use of them. So things are going to change significantly. Factories are going to be rather faster. I also think, by the way, slower as well as faster, but we'll come to that when I explain it this afternoon. But they're going to be more responsive and closer to customers. I think we're going to get used to, our children are going to get used to seeing factories in shops. It already happens. You can go to some places and get stuff made for you. Well, that's just the absolute tip of an iceberg, and we will industrialize that process. There's going to be massive new market opportunities in all sorts of areas and products. This is a very high-skilled world. Incredibly. Already in the UK, 40% of manufacturing jobs are graduate level. 40%. This is one of the highest qualified sectors, and yet we often imagine that it's the opposite. And of course, it would have to be more sustainable. So I'm happy to report in my last slide that the report generated 76 recommendations, and at last count, 45 had been accepted by BIS. Do tell me if I'm off path here. 18 were really issues related to the future of manufacturing that had ownership in other departments. 10 were kept under review. I'm not quite sure what that means. I actually not sure if it's kicked in the long grass or meaningful. And 3 were outright rejected. The setting up of an office for manufacturing, increased funding for STEM PhDs, yay, for those of us who are academics, and changes to the legal framework on shareholder rights. Vince Cable's office reviewed those 3 rejections and rejected 2 of those rejections. So there will be some action on increased funding for STEM PhD students. I don't know whether that will be hard money, but that is accepted as a recommendation. And changes, and more work is being done on looking at changes to the legal framework on shareholder rights. It's only the Office for Manufacturing that has now failed the test. We think that's a bloody big success, 75 out of 76 accepted. It's still a long way before it becomes action, and we'll pass the loaded pass over to Mark later. And on that, I'm going to thank you for this, and we're going to enter coffee break unless there is a fantastic question for Greg. Would you like to come and join me? Say thank you to Greg.